she does several different presentations. This one here will be of the women's role in the Civil War. She also does one, a real excellent one, of General Lee's wife. And General Lee's wife, actually, I don't know if many of you know the Arlington Cemetery. That was their plantation. It was actually his wife's family's plantation. And she does a real good presentation on that also. But I will turn it over to her and we'll hear what they have to say about women in the Civil War.
Well, good evening. Good evening. Gentlemen. It's nice to kind of come in and set a spell and just kind of reminisce. War's going on now for 2 years. I've been at both Manassas. I've been in Washington. And you know, women folk, some of them did a lot more than just tear up cloth for bandages and you know, take care of the home front. Many women decided to join up. Most of them for the same reason as the boys do, and that is the romance of it all, the glory of it all. They also joined up for the bounty, for the pay, and most of the women that joined also, like the men, came from farms, and they were struggling on those farms with large families. So that's why they made some decisions to do that. Now, women in the Army is no stranger. You know, Napoleon had women in uniform in his army. They were called the vivandiers. Now these are women who served. They wore the uniform, but they wore a skirt. They wore a skirt. Napoleon felt that these women were very important to his troops. For morale purposes, they were able to come in with fresh food, produce, and they would take care of some of the little items that the Army couldn't do. And don't forget, an Army, you know, needs food in its belly to move along. So these women had great responsibility. They are not to be confused with anything such as, pardon me ladies, but prostitutes. They were not that at all. So it became an honored tradition, and there were such women. Now there were some women, some that I know, they're actually sweethearts of the regiment. They're probably, most of them are officers' daughters. And again, their role was to don the uniform, well, with their skirts and a stiff petticoat. And usually they were great horsewomen. And they were there particularly for the men. And they would boost the morale. So every soldier in the regiment, that gal was their sweetheart. Even if they had one at home, somebody close by who cared enough to come by while they're sitting at the campfire and just have those feminine touch, you know, to make them feel like they still belonged and they were fighting for a reason, and that was for the ladies back home, for their children and whatnot. I want to tell you, don't get confused with women being nurses. Now, you might have heard of Dorothea Dix, and of course you all know Clara Barton. And they kind of started the female role in nursing. But nurses during the Civil War were men. They were men. And they're the ones, and my assignment in Washington was just that, was to be a nurse, but they didn't know. They did not know that I was a woman. And you might be wondering, well, now how could that be? How could I get away with that? Well, you know, when you go sign up, you stand in the line and the doc comes by, you know, and he said, open your mouth. And then look, got all your teeth, that was a plus. And he kind of check your limbs, look in your ears, make sure you didn't have any bugs, any lice, things like that. In St. John, there were no stripped down to your skivvies like in the future. In the United States Army, you had the boys stripped right down to skivvies and went right through the line. Well, we didn't do that during the Civil War. So you could hide that. You could hide it very well. Now some women would take to finding fake whiskers. And fake whiskers are around in my time, because theater was really big in my time. And the art of putting on that makeup to to make you look like another gender. That was available then. I knew some women had some mighty fine whiskers. You couldn't tell. Now some of them, because of age, and even the young men in the service, were so young that their whiskers hadn't showed yet. So as a woman, even if you're a little pale-faced, didn't matter. It was hard to tell the difference once you put the uniform on and tried to hide that figure. And what a lot of women did to get away with it was they would tape their chest. And they were able to pull this off. And you want to know why we made a better soldier? We tried real hard not to get hit. We tried real hard not to get hit. Because once you got hit, that meant you were going to see the surgeon. Okay? Especially if you got hit in the buttocks, or if you had a wound anywhere up in the chest area, yeah, it was pretty much all over. Even if you didn't die, if it wasn't a mortal wound, well, they were going to send you home. Because they didn't want women there. They didn't want us there. So we really tried hard not to get hit. But we could fight like demons. Just as good as the guys next to us. I knew no women could shoot the antenna off a butterfly probably at 500 yards with a musket. Why? Because they had to do that on a farm. You know, especially if you were part of a family where there were no sons. You had to pick up that slack. Everybody had their own job to do. That's part of the reason why some of the women, they wanted to get out of that situation. No gal. Her name is Sarah Emma Edmonton. If you look up her military record, she is known as Corporal Franklin Thompson. This gal's Canadian born. Just over the border, at 14 years old, on a farm, her pa was making arrangements for her to marry the old farmer down the road a piece. They needed to help. They needed to make some kind of a deal. They needed to help each other. Sarah didn't want to marry this guy. He was an old buck. She was 14 years old. Begged her pa, don't let this happen. Begged her mom, don't let this happen. Pa ignored. He just ignored his daughter's request for that, and he went ahead and made the plans. They had everything ready for this wedding at the farm. The food, people were invited to this wedding. Well, now, Sarah Emma's mom knew how hard life could be. She really didn't want this for her daughter. So, the night before the wedding, she helped her daughter get away. Out the window, off the farm, across the border into the United States. Now, in order to travel safely, Sarah had to don on men's clothing. She had to hide the fact that she was a woman so she wouldn't draw suspicion. Because I'm just going to say, you see a woman traveling alone in my time, well, they weren't good thoughts about those women. Because women didn't travel alone. You traveled with a gentleman. So in order to protect herself and not get sent back to the farm, she just started dressing like a man. Changed her name. Changed her name to Franklin Thompson. She landed in Michigan, worked her way into New England. And she ended up being an extremely successful Bible salesman and publisher. And as a matter of fact, she had been back in Michigan and had heard about the war. The war broke out. They fired on Fort Sumter. Now, though not officially a United States citizen, she went and she joined up with a Michigan group. And she went to war. She went to war. She ended up in Washington. Didn't particularly care for the nursing aspect. She was at First Manassas. She was at Second Manassas. She was at several of the smaller skirmishes. Unfortunately, she lasted till about 1863. She was able to disguise who she was. Well, lo and behold, she came down with a case of malaria from being in the South. Well, She really didn't want to go see the surgeon, but it was pretty bad. And she was discovered, and promptly the Army dismissed her. What did Sarah do? Well, she went back to New England. She then recuperated and joined right back up again. Joined right back up again. Sarah was lucky. She was never wounded. She made it through her service. It was getting towards the end of the war, where an accident basically landed her back in front of the Army surgeon, and again they booted her out. This time what she did do is she went back into service, but this time, instead of going in as a man, she actually went in and she worked for the United States government as a spy. And stayed in there till the end of the war. She did marry. She did eventually marry, and then she ended up going out west with her husband, where she lived out her life, and she actually wrote a memoir about what life was like and all that she had seen and done during the Civil War. Now there's another gal. This gal is a wildcat. She's actually Cuban. She was born in Cuba. Her mother was French-American, and her pa was a very wealthy, I believe, governor of Cuba. I'm trying to remember now. They were wealthy, and they had enough money that what they used to do is they would send her to live with her aunt in Louisiana. Now, her last name was Vasquez, Loretta Vasquez. Now, this gal's hero as a child was Joan of Arc. Had great fantasies about Joan of Arc and wanting to be Joan of Arc. Wanted to be a soldier and go to war. Well, now this is a Spanish family, very wealthy, and of course, her mother and father were going to hear none of this. And although different from Emma, where Emma was going to, her husband was going to be the old buck down the road, well, Loretta, they picked, I think he was a count. But she didn't want any part of that either. She had actually taken up a relationship with a sergeant in the Army, in the U.S. Army. So what do you think she did, Loretta? Well, again, getting close to the wedding, she elopes with her sergeant. Now, you know, we're getting close to the war breaking up, and Loretta was absolutely fascinated, you know, with war and strategy. She had all these grand ideas of what it was going to like, what it would be like. She was an excellent horsewoman, so she just had herself all set up to be this grand figure in a uniform, riding this horse and leading her men to battle. Now, her husband, he was a pretty good guy. His husband went during my period of time because he thought the one way to cure Loretta was to let her go ahead and see what it was like to be a man. So she took his suits, she got dressed up, she donned on the fake whiskers, and she and her husband were hitting all of the taverns in Louisiana, in New Orleans. She thought this was great, but her husband, well, he thought maybe I made a mistake here, because she was more determined than ever to join up. Well, the war breaks out, and her husband is called up to duty, and he leaves, and he's leaving to Washington to train the troops. So Loretta decides she is going to become Harry Buford, and Harry Buford is going to raise a company of men. And guess what? She raises 236 men. But they were the Louisiana Grays. And she drove them all the way. She drove them all the way up to meet up with her husband. Unfortunate thing for Loretta, though, was as her husband was training the troops, you know, some of these fellers weren't that bright. And unfortunately, while he was trying to teach him how to fire that musket and reload it, a mistake was made. So he got blown to kingdom come. Loretta was within 2 days' ride. He was mortally wounded and he passed on. Now, nobody knew, you know, what she was trying to do. She had gotten the news before she got there, so she never revealed who she really was. Well, she decided then, she got the men there, she left them there, and she went out looking to find another company, another regiment that she could join up with. And that's what she did. She found another regiment and she rode with him. She was a very good horsewoman, as I said. Now, her commanding officer would often send her on some pretty dangerous rides, crossing enemy lines, and she'd been shot at. Now, one time, you know, they were foraging and they needed some food, and Loretta was with a group of men, and they went into this southern woman's home, and they were taking the chickens, and they were taking things like that. This rebel woman was giving them what for, and she had come out with a gun, and Loretta turned around as she was riding away, and the woman was about to take aim. She turned around and shot her right in the hand, dropped the weapon, and they went on their merry way. She is afraid of nothing or no one. Well, again, there was always the concern, as I said, about, you know, you don't want to be found out because they're going to send you home. And, well, now her husband, he passed away. And she sort of struck up a really good friendship with a captain in her regiment. Now, most of the fellas figured they were just hitting it off and they were just being really good friends. And his name was Reed. And, well, Loretta thought it was time to fess up to somebody. So Loretta told Reed that she really wasn't a man, that she was a woman. Apparently she had some feelings for him. Well, needless to say, the poor fella almost hit the floor when he found out that, you know, Harry was really Loretta. And he wanted no part with her. Now Loretta, that Spanish blood in her, that really riled her up. The relationship really cooled, and then Loretta found out that Reed actually had a fiancée back home that she didn't know about. And, you know, if you read some of the diaries that those soldiers wrote at the time, you can kind of read in there where they were saying, you know, Harry and Reed weren't getting along as good as they used to. And none of the fellas had a clue that Harry was really a woman and was Loretta. So Reed got himself transferred. He got himself right out of there. Well, she kept doing her job, kept riding between the lines, taking up arms against the rebels. Well, she then takes up with a fellow who was an assistant surgeon. And again, you know, the relationship went on and on and on until, well, she did get wounded. She took a good shot in the shoulder. And she had to go to the surgeon, as much as she said she was all right. And then she was found out. And she was, again, dismissed from the army. But Loretta being Loretta, or Harry being Harry, he just went and found himself another regiment. And he joined up again. Finally, at the end of the war, when the war was over, she actually did meet up with a fine gentleman. She went right back to being a lady, had no problem with it. And they did eventually get married, and they had a few children. And again, they also moved, you know, out west. And Loretta died in 1890. She had lived a very long and good life. The interesting thing about us wanting to do this is that these women, they didn't want to be men. They didn't want to be men, but what they wanted was in their own, as a woman, they wouldn't be allowed to serve their country, but they still wanted to do that. They still wanted to be out there. Now, at the beginning of the 20th century, historians figured for the Union, there was about 400 women that actually served in military uniform as men. Reps had about 250. Towards the end of the 20th century, those numbers are looking like they're way up over 1,000. Why you won't find a whole lot on women in the uniform is because they tried desperately to disguise themselves so that they wouldn't be found out. So it's really hard to nail down according to their regiment or their service. Some of the women preferred to keep it private. When it came time to get a pension, however, you know, some of these women had to fight long and hard. They had to prove, more so than anybody else who served, you know, that they were entitled to that pension. So they had to find people, you know, you're talking now the war's over a good 40 years and 30 years, and they need to get the pension, and they have to go and find some people who they trusted enough to even let know, you know, that they were women in service. So how we know that there's at least 750 both sides is because of those pension records and because of testimony that had to be given as to their service. These women could shoot, they could fight, just like the guy standing next to them. Just like the guy standing next to them. And they did. And they did. A lot of the women who had left diaries behind, you know, they talk about the bullets whizzing by their heads, and they talk about the atrocity that they saw. They talked about, after the battle, you know, the bodies laying all over the field. Trying to help, you know, and trying to get some of their comrades, you know, off the field of battle. And many of them had no clue that they were actually women. They were actually women. Keep in mind, too, you know, these guys, well, you know, you weren't taking, you know, the latrine was a ditch dug outside. You really didn't wash up much, you know, and the possibility of taking off, you know, your clothes to do things like that was like, you just didn't do it in those days. You know, you just didn't do it. You might take something to the laundry or to a laundress, but you're going to change somewhere else. But they managed to pull it off. They managed to pull it off. So they went beyond the call, and they were very strong, and they were way ahead of their time. Now, anybody have any questions for me about that life? The life of a female soldier. Encamped, smoked, definitely smoked, gambled, did all of it, just like a man.
What about that time of the month?
You know?
Good question.
And I'll tell you what, no, it's a great question, only because, now here's what you do. They were able to disguise that and to hide that, okay? Because if you needed bathroom facilities, you went out into the woods. Okay, even the men, I mean, I don't know, I guess sometimes there's vision of everybody lining up along the ditch, but that is not what they did. You know, they're in the battlefield and that, they're encamped, you're going out and digging your own ditch for certain other purposes, okay? So it was not unusual then, if you were to get up and you needed to address that issue, nobody's gonna know, you just bear the evidence. That was all, they didn't know.
They're gonna tell them that when you put them on the front line. Turn loose.
It was different. It was different. It really was different. From a physical standpoint or a medical standpoint, you have to understand about the female body, okay? It's called, I believe it's pronounced amenorrhea, which is where the cycle will just stop.
Stop, right?
It stops. It will stop under extreme duress, stress, and also diet has a lot to do with that. I would imagine some of these rebel women, I think that's probably what happened, and they wouldn't have to even worry about addressing it because, you know, they were all starving. You know, towards the end of the war, they were all scrounging around for food. So that probably did stop, you know. Some women did join their husbands, okay, which was another way of them getting away with it. They would go along with the husband. They ended up, buddy system, 2 in a tent. Husband's glad she's there because he doesn't know how to sew. So she's going to sew, you know, the buttons on his shirt and whatnot, you know, along those lines. But it's you know, they were extremely thin, you know, by the end of the war. And exercise. Exercise will do that as well. extreme bouts of exercising, and you're marching and marching and marching, you know, not an ounce of fat, all lean, hungry. So it became a non-issue, you know, for a lot of the women. There was record of a few women who did go with their husbands because they didn't want to be left behind. They didn't want to be broke, and this was a paycheck, so they did stay. Some of them had to leave and got found out because they did get pregnant. They did get pregnant, so then they would definitely have to go and go back to a mother and a father who was there, go back to wherever they, you know. But they were way ahead of their time, these women. These women were way ahead of their time. Way ahead of their time. And they didn't want to do the bedpans and the nursing, even though that would be the logical conclusion. Now some of the women, like the Vivendiers, they definitely did exist. You might find some things out about prostitutes, you know, camp followers. I think it's unfair to kind of say that the camp followers, who are women, is that their other purpose. I really don't think so. These were women, you know, really, especially from the city. Now, you're on a farm, you can kind of get along okay. You got some kids to help you out, you'll have some food. But if you lived in the cities in the 1860s, not so, because you weren't working as a woman. Your ability to work was very limited. If you did work, it was kind of like you were looked down on. You know, you had that big wave of Irish immigrants coming in. A lot of these women, you know, not a whole lot of jobs there, even for them in the city. So I think what you saw primarily was some of the city women who would follow the Army because they can earn a wage by charging to do laundry, charging to sew on buttons. Even some of them would do some cooking. You know, 4 or 5 of the fellas would get together. And don't forget, the Army's had downtime. You know, right now they're in the thick of things because it's summer. But once, you know, after October, you don't see a whole lot going on between the two armies. So they are encamped till the spring. So these women actually served a purpose there. They actually served a purpose. Any other questions? Curiosities? Because, and the other thing too was the hair. Now, you just tuck it up under the hat. Because we all had long hair. So it was really easy to do that. And the hat never really came off. You slept in your hat. You did everything in your uniform, even the shirt. But if you were really good at it, like Loretta was and Emma was, then you just, you know, you're just tucking it under there. That's all you're doing. Nobody really paid much attention. And really, the regular private, these guys want to stay alive. And if you prove yourself once on that battlefield, they're not gonna turn you in. You know, you're a good shot, and you were killing Rebs, or you were killing Yanks, they're going to keep your secret. They're not going to say one way or the other. And so the only fear that really crept into them was, again, was the officers. If the commanding officer found out. Some captains knew, but they also knew that some of these women were darn good fighters and good leaders. You know, some of them. So they kept, you know, until it came. But it was it wasn't that hard to do, it really wasn't. If you get a chance, and you can, on your computer, Google up Loretta Vasquez. Her transformation from a woman into Larry Buford is absolutely phenomenal. They have daguerreotype of her in full uniform. She's got a mustache, goatee, and to look at it, you can't tell it's not real. You cannot tell. That's how good her disguise was. Any questions? Any? No? I think I would have liked doing that myself, you know, joining up and kind of seeing the world